My name is Victoria Hastings. I'm 38 and I live in a small lakeside town in Michigan. That morning, as I walked into the kitchen like I always did, the last thing I expected was to find a folded note sitting silently on the granite counter. Among unopened mail and an unpaid electric bill, the messy, rushed handwriting stopped my heart cold. I'm tired of you and this boring life. I'm taking everything that belongs to me. Oh, and this house? It's already sold. Enjoy whatever's left. The last line was underlined in black ink, like he wanted to make sure I wouldn't miss it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. My hands crushed the paper, but my eyes stayed dry. After 14 years of marriage, I had endured countless quiet betrayals, but this time he acted like a cold-blooded thief. No warning, no goodbye, just a note left like I was an old piece of furniture he didn't bother taking. I took a deep breath, set the note down, opened the fridge for a bottle of water, and drank it slowly. Not out of thirst, but because I needed something cold to keep my hands from shaking. Mark, my husband, was 5 years older than me, a finance manager at an insurance company. He always prided himself on handling the money, though I paid most of the bills through the app myself. I run an online flower shop, Lexington Blooms, specializing in wedding arrangements and upscale event florals. He never took it seriously. It's just a bunch of flowers, he'd say. Don't fool yourself into thinking you're some entrepreneur. Maybe I should have seen it coming sooner. Over the past few weeks, Mark had been coming home late. The reasons were always late meetings or traffic on I-94. He started avoiding eye contact when we talked, and the way he carried his laptop into the bathroom raised more than a few flags. Still, I never thought he'd go this far, listing our mortgaged home for sale behind my back, then walking out like I was the last obstacle to his fresh start. This Cape Cod-style two-story house was my pride. I picked every paint color, every paving stone on the porch. I planted every row of lavender in the front yard, where Mark never once spent 5 minutes pulling weeds. And now he says, I sold the house? Like he had the right? I set the water bottle down and checked my phone. No missed calls, no messages, like he'd vanished. I tried calling. His phone was off. His Instagram account? Completely wiped. I stood still for a long time, staring out the window, watching the pale morning light reflect off Grandview Lake. A breeze came through the doorframe, carrying the damp scent of spring grass and the bitter truth. He was gone. But what cut deepest wasn't that he left. It was how he tried to take everything with him and never looked back. I gripped my phone tighter and opened our banking app. Some vague instinct made my palms go cold. Joint account balance, $138.47. My blood froze. Just 6 days ago, we had over $27,000 in there. Our holiday savings, emergency fund, and most of my recent income from earlier this month. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I opened the front-facing camera and stared into it. No, Victoria, you're not breaking, not for him. I smoothed my hair and pulled out an old floral pin from the drawer, the first accessory I ever sold online 5 years ago. As I looked at it, only one thought came to mind. I built this business from nothing. I kept this house. This life is mine. And no one, not even Mark, gets to steal it without consequences. I still remember last year's birthday, when Mark gave me a pair of cheap cubic zirconia earrings tossed into a dark red velvet box. I may be a florist, but I once took a short course in jewelry design. One glance was enough to tell they were mass-produced junk, maybe worth $20 at most. Yet there he was, proudly telling our friends, Victoria's got a great eye. She'll spot quality right away. I forced a smile then, but later that night I sat in the bathroom for over an hour, wondering why he treated me like a naive dreamer. What started as teasing had grown into thinly veiled contempt. You're lucky to have a husband in finance, he once said in front of guests. That little flower shop of yours couldn't even feed a dog. They all laughed politely. I didn't. Not because it hurt, but because I was ashamed I'd let him belittle my worth for so long. About 3 months after that birthday, I began noticing subtle changes. Mark started going on frequent business trips over the weekends. mainly to Chicago or Denver, always claiming to meet high-profile clients. Whenever I asked for details, he dodged or blamed a dead phone, sometimes not replying for hours. One evening, I drove by the office he claimed to be in, Lockridge and Hamel, downtown Grand Rapids. Every light was off, the place was deserted. I didn't confront him. I made a note in my planner, snapped a photo of the building, and timestamp. Quiet, precise. Everything hit the ceiling when I spotted a strange transaction in our banking app. $6,200 wired to an unknown account, Elwood Holdings. I asked casually, "What's this transfer about?" Mark barely blinked before saying, "Private equity." I wanted it to be a surprise. I smiled at him, but inside I knew this surprise wasn't meant for me, and it wasn't going to be sweet. That night, I took action. First, I opened a private account at a small local bank, where my cousin Cassidy worked as a teller. I began funneling small amounts of revenue from Lexington Blooms there, never more than $1,000 at a time to stay under his radar. Then I started gathering evidence. I bought a discrete storage device the size of a flash drive and hid it behind our Wi-Fi router. It tracked every online session in the house. What I found took my breath away. Mark was frequently visiting crypto forums, logging into a sketchy email handle, BriarPatch56. Once he left his iPad on the couch, no password. Inside was a draft email to someone named Nina C. She suspects nothing. Everything's in place. Once the house sells, it's done. I screenshot everything and backed it up to a private email he never knew existed. Next came legal counsel. I reached out to Joelle, a college friend who now practices family law in Traverse City. Over lunch, I vaguely mentioned a few details. She set her tea down, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Victoria, you're not describing a broken marriage. You're describing systematic financial manipulation." That afternoon, I sent her everything I'd collected. She quietly began preparing a divorce file, thorough and under the radar. She also helped me verify property ownership. As my guts suspected, during last year's renovation, Mark had hastily signed a power of attorney, granting me sole refinancing rights. He was too distracted chasing his investment opportunity to read the fine print. Legally, the house now belonged to me. He had no idea, and I had no intention of correcting him. From that moment, I lived in two parallel worlds, one as the dutiful wife, brewing tea, watering plants, smiling at dinner, the other as a woman silently drafting her survival plan in the dark. I still cooked dinner, still watched Netflix with him, but my phone never left my side. Every comment, every glance, every odd excuse filed away in my mind like evidence. One night, I caught him in the mirror, adjusting his collar, whispering to himself, "I can't lose this, she can't stop it." He wasn't talking to me, but I heard it, and I was ready. Ready for a game he didn't even realize he was already losing. The next morning, while I was finishing up a wedding flower order, I got an email with a blaring subject line in all caps. "Urgent signature required, house sale agreement." The sender was Travis Monroe, a real estate agent I'd never met. I opened it, read the first line, and felt a chill down my spine. "Dear Mrs. Hastings, your husband, Mr. Mark Hastings, has authorized us to proceed with the sale of the property at 1128 Willow Creek Drive. We require your signature on the transfer agreement within 48 hours to finalize the transaction." I zoomed in on the attached document. Mark's name was clearly listed as the seller. The co-owner field was blank, waiting for me. Without my signature, it wasn't valid. And he knew it. I called Travis immediately. He picked up fast, his tone upbeat. "Hi, Mrs. Hastings. Everything's set. We just need your signature. Your husband said you were on board." "I never agreed to this," I cut in calmly. "And legally, this home is under my name. No one can sell it without my consent." Silence, a long one. Travis cleared his throat. "Oh, well," he was very confident. "He said you'd sign right away." I smiled, even though no one could see it. "That's unfortunate. Any further attempts to sell this property without my consent will be reported to my attorney." I hung up before he could say another word. 30 seconds later, my phone buzzed with a string of messages from Mark. "Victoria, Don't make this messy, just sign the papers. You've got 24 hours to get your stuff out. You're not gonna win this. I leaned back in my chair. A strange, quiet certainty filled my chest. There it was. He made his move. I texted Joelle 3 words. It's time. She replied with the gavel emoji. Everything was ready. That evening, I sat in my home office, the room that used to be Mark's sports den, and looked at the small map pinned to the wall. Yellow sticky notes surrounded every key point. Transfers, power of attorney, private investigator, unknown bank accounts. Each dot now connected into a tight closing loop. 3 weeks earlier, Joelle had hired Dean Solberg, a former detective turned PI. Quiet, efficient. He delivered detailed reports on Mark's movements. The business trips were really gambling binges in Indiana and Michigan. Thousands spent on roulette and blackjack. One surveillance photo showed Mark with a red-hailed woman, arm around her shoulder. I printed it all, filed it in a thick binder, neatly labeled, Mark, not as smart as he thinks. He had no idea. I had everything. And the house, the very thing he planned to flip for his fresh start, was about to become his first fatal misstep. The next afternoon, while I was checking inventory at the shop, Mark showed up. He knocked hard, like someone running from a chase, then barged in as soon as I opened the door. What the hell are you doing? He snapped, face red. Travis said you refused to sign. Have you lost your mind? I closed my notebook and stood up straight. This house is in my name, Mark. You have no right to sell it. Don't play games. Everything we have is shared. He stepped closer, nearly face to face. No, it's not. Did you forget the refinancing meeting last June? I said slowly, eyes locked on his. You signed power of attorney over to me because you had an urgent meeting in Chicago. His expression shifted from fury to confusion. He stepped back. I didn't, he began, then froze as I pulled a folder from the drawer. This is the signed refinancing document. Your signature's right here. I handed it to him. Here's also the statement from our joint account, where you withdrew $27,000 over 2 months and funneled it into a crypto wallet under another name. He stumbled back. I set the binder on the table, my voice steady. And this is the investigator's report. Photos, video stills. Would you like to see? He went silent, his eyes locked on the documents like they might disappear if he glared hard enough. You can't do this, he hissed. Mark, I said, placing my hand on the divorce file Joelle had delivered that morning. It's not that I can. I already did. He stared at me for a long time. So long I thought he might scream, throw something, or cry. But he didn't. He just dropped into the chair, face pale. I never thought you'd fight back, his voice cracked. That was your biggest mistake, I replied. You thought I was just the florist wife waiting for her husband to bring home the paycheck? He had nothing left to say. The next morning, while I was checking a new flower order in my studio, my phone buzzed with an email from Joelle. Lawsuit has been filed, case is complete, joint account temporarily frozen. I held my finger on the screen for a few seconds, then let it go. Lightness, not satisfaction, just the calm that comes with finally being in full control. Every move Mark made from now on would have to go through the law. No more performance, no more power plays. By noon, Mark showed up again, but this time not with the swagger of someone in charge. He knocked 3 times, then stood there silently. No arrogance, no demands. His eyes shifted like someone who had just lost his map in the middle of the forest. I opened the door, keeping a safe distance. I need to talk. I crossed my arms. If it's about the house or assets, you should speak to my lawyer. Then, can I come in to get some of my things? He said softly, like he was a guest in someone else's home. I paused for a moment, then stepped aside. 15 minutes, living room only. Don't go upstairs. Mark stepped in, his eyes catching the new lavender print I'd hung in the hallway, the one he once mocked for looking like a supermarket catalog. Now it hung exactly where I wanted it, a quiet statement that this house had changed. I poured myself a glass of water to steady my hands. I wasn't scared of him, I just knew the type. Men like Mark don't lose without flailing one last time. I didn't think you'd take it this far, he said, sinking into the couch, voice dry. Because you're used to me backing down? He lowered his head. I crossed a line. But you didn't have to bring in lawyers. I set the water down and slid the divorce file across the coffee table toward him. You illegally transferred funds, tried to sell the house behind my back, and there's proof of another woman. What did you expect me to do? Send you a best of luck card? He didn't answer. His face had lost all color, his shoulders slumped, like they were carrying every mistake he'd ever made. The joint account's been frozen. The court is reviewing an emergency order to protect my legal share. You don't understand. I needed that money to start over, he muttered. I laughed, cold and flat. Start over? After all those years of undermining my business, mocking every shipment I packed, now you want money from the woman you called useless to build your new life? Mark stood up, pacing like a man who no longer knew where he belonged. I just wanted freedom, to not feel tied down. And that freedom starts with theft, betrayal, and lies? I stared him dead in the eye. That's not freedom, Mark. That's cowardice. Right then, the doorbell rang. I knew who it was. Joelle stepped in, carrying a leather briefcase, calm and composed. Hi, Mark, she said, like a banker informing someone their account was overdrawn. I just returned from court. The temporary asset protection order has been approved. Here's a copy of the filing. Mark took the papers with shaking hands. As his eyes scanned the pages, his lips tightened. He sank back into the couch like a man who just heard a death sentence. The court will be contacting you soon about your first hearing date. We'll be forwarding all documents to your attorney. If you don't have one yet, I suggest finding one. Quickly. Quote, Joelle's tone didn't waver. Her eyes didn't blink. Mark pressed his hand to his forehead and gave a slow nod. I'd never seen him this quiet for so long. I stood, walked toward the door. You should go now. Whatever's left in this house, emotionally or materially, doesn't belong to you anymore. He didn't argue, didn't protest. He just stood, bowed his head, and walked past Joelle like a man who'd lost the game without ever seeing the full board. As he stepped outside, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and flinched. His face went pale. Joelle turned to me. Could be the bank, might have started looking into those suspicious withdrawals. Maybe, I said, voice steady. Or maybe it's his girlfriend asking why he hasn't sent the rent money for the apartment like he promised. Joelle smiled faintly. I've got a meeting at the bank this Friday. Marital funds misused under a joint account tend to move up their priority list. I nodded, picked up the glass, and took it to the sink. Outside, Mark sat on the front steps, head in hands. A man who once thought he was untouchable, now shrinking like a shadow in the midday sun. Not because of guilt, but because of failure. Because he had lost. 3 months after the first court hearing, my life had entered an entirely new chapter. The house Mark once tried to secretly sell had now become a symbol of freedom and rebirth. I started by clearing out the basement. What used to be packed with old gym equipment and tangled cords became a full-fledged flower studio with proper lighting, a temperature-controlled cooler, and a large work table I painted in a soft cream yellow myself. On the main wall, I hung a handwritten copper-lettered sign. This is a space that belongs to you. Lexington Blooms, my online flower shop, was entering its 6th year with growth like I'd never seen before. Orders doubled in the first quarter alone after I cut ties with Mark for good. I hired 2 new team members, Chloe, a freshly graduated design talent with incredible creativity, and Marie, a single mom rebuilding her life after divorce. Both had once been underestimated, but under this roof, no one was. I expanded our services, from weddings to high-end event florals and monthly subscription boxes for office spaces. One day, I received an email from an architecture firm in Detroit. They wanted to collaborate on designing indoor green spaces using dried flowers, something I had experimented with last winter. They mentioned discovering a short TikTok video I'd posted, one I almost deleted, thinking no one's going to watch this. But what made me proudest wasn't the contracts or sales. It was what happened every Saturday afternoon, Bloom Circle. That simple name came from Joelle's suggestion. She encouraged me to open my space as a regular gathering for women in the area, those who'd been dismissed, called stay-at-home hobbyists, or had their dreams crushed by someone who didn't believe they could. The first meeting had just 5 of us: me, Joelle, Chloe, Marie, and Avery, a ceramic artist recently divorced and rediscovering herself. We sat around the long wooden table in my kitchen, sipping herbal tea, sharing stories so raw they caught in our throats. I talked about the moment I found Mark's note. Marie cried when she recalled her ex-husband laughing at her dream of opening a small bakery. Chloe shared how her ex-boyfriend posted online mocking her handmade crafts as kid stuff, which led her to delete her entire Etsy store. Then we laughed like we were finally breathing, laughed because we were free and didn't need anyone's permission for it. From 5 women, Bloom Circle grew fast. By week 4, I had to rearrange the living room, bring in folding chairs, and set up a whiteboard. One day, I counted 19 women squeezed into a space meant for 8. No one complained. Every woman came carrying doubt and left with something glowing in her eyes. I launched a workshop called From Kitchen Table to Dream, teaching women how to turn personal passions into small businesses: candle making, houseplant styling, gift wrapping, floral design. Not everyone would succeed, but everyone deserved the right to start. No one deserved to be laughed at just for dreaming. One evening, after a workshop, Avery stayed behind to help wash the mugs. She stood by the window, gazing at the newly planted row of red tulips in the backyard, and said quietly, "Victoria, when I was married, I wasn't even allowed to keep flowers in the house. He said the smell triggered his allergies. And anytime I mentioned ceramics, he'd say, 'You think you're going to make a living molding clay?'" I looked at her, my chest tightening. "And now I'm here," she continued, "surrounded by people who don't laugh. Thank you, not just for sharing your space, but for proving that it can actually be real." I smiled, dried my hands on a cloth, and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "This space doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every woman who was once told she wasn't enough. But look at them now. They're still doing it." A few days later, I received an invitation to speak at the Midwest Creative Women's Conference. One of our Bloom Circle members, Lana, who worked on the town council, had nominated me. I nearly declined. I was once the woman who trembled before every parent-teacher meeting, who rehearsed emails 3 times before hitting send. But Joelle said, "If you don't stand up there, who's going to tell the story for women like you?" I nodded. And a few weeks later, I stood under stage lights, wearing a lavender dress, the same color Mark used to call "too old lady." I told my story without embellishment or tragedy, just the truth. At the end, I held up a dried hydrangea and said, "This used to be the cheapest thing I sold in my shop. Today, it's a symbol of resilience. Breaking doesn't mean the end. Starting over doesn't mean you've failed. And I'm here to say, sometimes the person you most need to believe in is yourself." One October afternoon, while I was tidying up the studio after the Start From Your Kitchen workshop, my phone pinged with a new email. The sender, Lauren Hastings, Mark's youngest sister. I frowned. It had been nearly a year since Mark walked out of this house. The same day, I slid my wedding ring off and never once looked back. Since then, I'd blocked all contact from his side of the family. But Lauren was different. She was the only one in the Hastings family who never mocked Lexington blooms. I opened the email. "Dear Victoria, I know you probably don't want to hear anything related to Mark, but I hope you'll read this. Mark is now living alone in a rental apartment in Lansing. I visited last week. He looks worn down, like someone I barely recognize. His new job isn't going well, credit debt is piling up, and his car got repossessed after he missed 3 payments. He told me, 'Lauren, I messed up. I thought I was smart, but I didn't realize I'd lost the only person who ever truly believed in me.' I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or a reunion. I just thought you deserved to know that, however late, Mark is starting to understand what he destroyed. I set the phone down. What I felt wasn't bitterness, nor relief, just nothing. No emotional debt, no anger, no expectations. When the court finalized everything over the summer, the judge ordered Mark to return nearly $22,000 he had illegally withdrawn from our joint account and held him fully liable for any debt incurred after the freeze. He tried to negotiate, tried to cry, tried to plead for leniency. I've lost my job, my house, everything. But Joelle's documentation was airtight. The law doesn't care about trembling voices, it only reads numbers. The one-bedroom apartment in Lansing that Lauren mentioned, I had seen its photo in a rental listing. White walls, laminate cabinets, no west-facing windows. A suffocating space. Exactly like how Mark once described my home office idea when I wanted to convert the attic. I didn't reply to Lauren's email, not out of spite, just because I didn't need to. I'd spent years carrying the emotional weight for others, justifying my husband's moods, excusing his careless words because maybe he's under pressure. But now, everyone owns their actions, even if they regret them. Regret doesn't buy a ticket back in time. A week later, I was invited to the Women of Grit Gala in Chicago, an event honoring independent female entrepreneurs across the Midwest. I was told I had been nominated by multiple members of the community, not just for Lexington Bloom's revenue, but for the workshop series and the impact of Bloom Circle. I drove to Chicago alone, hands steady, mind clear. I wore a teal dress, the color I never used to dare wear because Mark said it made me look too strong. I didn't need to be softer for anyone anymore. When I walked on stage to accept the Resilience Award, I looked out over a room of nearly 300 women, all smiling, all applauding. Some had taken flower classes at my studio. Others had emailed me saying they'd started soap making, opened bakeries, taken their first wedding stationery order. I didn't think about Mark in that moment. I thought about who I was 2 years ago. The woman fumbling in the kitchen with her first order. Hands trembling while packing flowers, afraid someone might laugh. I thought about the note on the counter. I'm taking everything. And I wanted to smile, not out of spite, but because he hadn't. After the event, back at the hotel, I opened my laptop to check emails. One stood out. Mark H. It wasn't blocked. He used a new email address. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but if I may, I just want to say I'm sorry for everything. Not because I expect forgiveness, but because you deserve to hear it. Wishing you happiness? Ugh. I stared at that last line for a long time. Then I closed the email. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond. I stood, pulled back the hotel curtain. Outside, the city lights glowed, bright, but not harsh. I stepped into the tub and let a few dried lavender petals float into the hot water. Mark may have fallen, but I no longer needed to know if he ever stood back up, because my path long ago had stopped depending on his footsteps. I returned from Chicago on a crisp November morning. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the last few maple leaves trembled on their branches like fingers letting go of an old sadness. I parked in front of the house, stepped onto the porch, and placed my hand on the familiar doorknob. The one Mark once said really needs replacing. It's too rusted. It was still rusted, but solid, like me. Inside, the house smelled of dried cinnamon bark and lavender. Chloe had stopped by the day before to water the plants and left a bouquet of white asters on the kitchen counter, along with a note. You're our light. I placed the flowers in the ceramic vase Avery had gifted me, her first sale after the workshop. I didn't just see flowers, I saw the journey. The sleepless nights. The hands that trembled not from cold, but from wondering if I was good enough, strong enough, or even allowed to dream big. After unpacking, I climbed up to the attic, once a dusty storage space, now my sanctuary. There stood the reclaimed wood table I'd bought from a local craftsman, a window frame overlooking the pond behind the garden, and a small cabinet where I kept only things that mattered. but never shouted for attention. I opened it and took out a gray velvet box. Inside was a plain silver ring, its inner band delicately engraved. Trust your strength. I slipped it onto my right ring finger, not to replace a lost wedding ring, but to seal a promise. Not to anyone else, but to myself. That no matter what tomorrow brings, I will never again be the woman who needed permission to live her truth. The ring was made by a local jeweler, James, whom I met when ordering a display frame for Lexington Bloom's first showcase. He was the only man who ever asked, "What do you want to do next?" instead of, "Are you sure you can handle that?" I wouldn't call it love, not yet, but through quiet conversations, brief coffee runs, and packing orders side by side for a community event, I realized some people don't show up to rescue you. They appear to remind you that you no longer need to be rescued. That evening, I hosted a small gathering, not a Bloom circle, not a workshop, just a winter tea with candles, soft jazz, and the same women who once sat silent in our first meeting, now laughing loudly about their first contracts, first clients, and the first time they dared to say their dream out loud. Marie brought homemade oat muffins. Avery arrived with 2 new vases, each etched with a different phrase. Start with your own hands. Then they bought. I invited everyone up to the attic. When they walked in and saw the warm, bright space and the wooden cabinet with a hidden drawer, Avery asked softly, "What do you keep in there?" I opened it and showed them the velvet box. No secrets, no long speech. This is the ring I had made after finalizing the divorce. Not to relive the past, but to remember why I rose. I took it off and passed it around. I wear it every morning, not to show anyone, just to remind myself that strength isn't about never falling, it's knowing you can get back up every time and keep moving. The room went quiet. Not awkward, just full. Some truths only need to touch one heart to echo far. When everyone left, I walked each of them to the door. Finally, it was just me and the firelight casting gentle shadows on the wall. I stepped into the kitchen and looked out the window at the backyard, where I had planted the first wildflowers after Mark left. A breeze stirred the wind chime hanging by the porch. Its soft sound rang out, not loud, not demanding, just a whisper. Freedom isn't something others give you. It's what you choose to keep, even when no one stands beside you. I touched the ring gently, feeling the engraving against my skin. I have no regrets, not for loving Mark, not for staying too long, and certainly not for leaving. Because without all of it, I wouldn't have this life today, the one I live fully, firmly, and unafraid of anyone's laughter but my own. Victoria's story proves that true strength doesn't lie in avoiding pain, but in rising from where you were once broken. In real life, many women quietly endure, get dismissed, or have their worth diminished. But when they draw boundaries and believe in their own power, they don't just reclaim their lives, they create something greater, a rebirth. Victoria wasn't out for revenge, she rediscovered herself, and that is the greatest victory of all. What do you think about Victoria's journey and the choices she made? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about life, family, and the path to self-discovery